touch the middle button. I don't know.
Good evening, members. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit, Governance and Standards Committee. I have been advised that there are no fire drills planned for tonight, but if the alarm does sound, Miss Snook to my side will ascertain the situation and provide further instructions. I will remind you that this meeting will be broadcast live and recorded for playback on the Maidstone Borough Council website, but will anyone else be recording or filming the proceedings? I ask so that people at the meeting will know if this will be happening. Members who are using mobile phones or tablets are also asked to ensure they are on silent and are only being used with regards to items on the agenda this evening. Item number 1, apologies for absence. I have received apologies for absence from Councillor Atkinson, Cox, McLaughlin, Titchener and Vizenden. Item number 2, notification of substitute members.
Councillor English for Councillor Cox.
Councillor Khadka for Councillor Page.
Councillor Mrs Blackmore for Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you. Item number 3, urgent items. I have agreed to take appendices 1 and 3 to 19 as urgent items as the documents were not available when the agenda was published. There are also some amendments to Appendix 1 to item 12 and Appendix 2 to the narrative statement and audited statements of accounts in number 19. Have you all got copies? Yep.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's a comment, and it's something slightly surprised me. I think we're all aware that there was there has been supposedly a disclosure of confidential information, and this is the Audit, Governance and Standards Committee, and I was expecting at least some sort of update where we're at, because I gather there's a leak inquiry being undertaken, and certainly some members of my group have been interviewed, not particularly happy about it, I have to say, but they have been. And I would have expected the Standards and Governance Committee to at least been updated and kept in the picture as to what on earth is going on. Thank you.
I'll ask a head of legal to answer that for you.
Thank you. The investigation is still ongoing. We are hoping to incorporate it into the annual update regarding Code of Conduct matters in September. So we are aiming to finalise the informal investigation and provide an update to Audit, Governance and Standards in September. Thank you.
Moving on to item number 4, notification of visiting members. There are none. Item number 5, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures by members or officers? Councillor Daly.
Madam Chairman, I want to disclose that I, in fact, am a member of the KCC Pension Fund, and if we are discussing this under item 19 today, I will take no part in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 6, disclosures of lobbying. Are there any disclosures of lobbying? No. Item 7, exempt information. I move that the items on the agenda be taken in public as proposed. Agenda item 8, minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of March. I'll go through them page by page. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Do you all agree these are accurate record? Yeah. Thank you. Agenda item 9, questions and answers from members of the public. There are no questions. Agenda item 10, minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of May 2019. There's one page. Do you agree these are correct? Agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 11, committee work programme. Mr. Green will introduce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This sets out the programme for this committee for the coming year, and as usual, it contains a number of reports that you're obliged to see as part of the committee's terms of reference, and it also includes a number of items that the committee has expressed an interest in the past, such as the contract monitoring update and a report on Maidstone property holdings. And as things stand at the moment, we believe it's a comprehensive picture of what the committee will be doing over the coming year, but I'd be happy to take any questions from members or anything that you think should be added to it. Thank you.
Councillor English.
Just a very minor point. Under risk management process and the work plan, it's not yet got a confirmed date. Have we got any comments from Mr. Clark as to when that's likely to be coming?
That may be a duplicate item because there is a risk management annual report in September, which I expect will cover that ground.
If there are no other questions, we'll move on to the next item. So item 12, the annual governance statement. Ms Woodhouse, would you introduce, please?
Thank you, Chairman. As the committee will be aware, the Council is required to produce an annual governance statement each year, looking at the effectiveness of the previous year's governance arrangements and whether there are any actions required to improve our arrangements in 2019 to 20. We have not identified any significant issues arising from the review, and we're satisfied our governance arrangements are working well. The amendment on page 241 reflects this. So the paragraph that has significant governance issues as a heading is now amended to conclusion on significant governance issues. This has been moved to the front of the report rather than the end, so it's quite upfront in terms of this is what we think and here are the actions we're going to take. I thought it was more interesting to put it in the front as well rather than saving it to the end, just so explaining the change there. Actions have been identified as per the table, several of which are linked to the Council's corporate risk register and governance issues that we've identified as we've looked through. Action was taken for all governance issues last year as detailed on page 17 of the report. Just to clarify, the item on data protection, as it's a personal interest I've got with regard to data protection compliance, those of you who are familiar with data protection will know that this is a gift that keeps on giving. It's quite a generous topic, and it's something that, so where I say action plan has been progressed, I do not mean it as finished, but we have taken a lot of action, and we will continue. I feel this is something that will go on, so I wanted to highlight that to you. But obviously, I'm happy to take any questions members have on the governance statement.
Councillor English.
Two things. Obviously, later on the agenda, we got issues on the annual internal audit report. Is it necessary to, in any way, cross-reference the comments that are made about improving the annual audit report in the governance document in any way? So that's point one.
I was consulted by Mrs Woodhouse in the compilation of the annual governance statement, and the results of our audit programme through the year have fed into this. I mean, a couple of them specifically on page 241 of the pack I'm looking at are things which arise directly from audit reports across the year. There will, as ever, be a number of more minor governance issues that come up in the rough and tumble of individual audit projects, but there are only a couple of issues which rise to the level of significant areas of improvement for recognising within the annual governance statement, and I'm satisfied that they've been appropriately represented.
So you feel it would be overdoing it to actually include a mechanism within the work plan, for example, referencing the governance report where we have a weak audit identified, and that would be overdoing it, do you think? There's
already there are already established sort of routines for dealing with results of audits and the recommendations that come out of the audit. If I were to form a view that there were significant problems in the working of that mechanism, that may itself feature in the annual governance statement. But without stealing my own thunder for the item I've got coming up later, I do deliver a positive assurance opinion on the governance of the council for the year. So I'm not at a point where I would expect to see that represented in this statement.
I'm glad you said that, because that was my view, but I think that it's worth asking the question because it has been mentioned by other members around the council, so I raised the question. Thank you very much for reassuring me. The other issue that sort of was referred to by Councillor Perry indirectly is whether, given what's happened with disclosure of exempt information or the risk, whether once any investigation is concluded, because obviously it would be premature before that, whether there might be some implications or may not be some implications for whatever conclusions are reached in terms of governance, and whether that should be, this report might have to be readdressed after any inquiry is concluded.
If I could clarify, the annual governance statement is a look back at 2018-19. So if it were identified as a result of the review and other work, so actually I have referenced in a very nuanced way on page 246, I do talk about the monitoring officer has had cause during the year to remind councillors about the obligations within the code relating to the disclosure of exempt and confidential information. At the point of providing this, having spoken to the head of legal, CLT, etc., and the corporate governance working group, it wasn't identified as such a significant governance issue that it had to be pulled out into the action plan. I mean, obviously the committee could recommend that I put it in the action plan and we could amend that to include it if you believe that's the case. It could be that if this continues over the course of next year, that it then becomes something that does go into our action plan probably for next year. But action's being taken to address it, we've referenced it, and there's work underway.
It would appear, if it needs to appear in next year's governance report rather than this year. Thank you very much.
Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just on page 17, in the key improvement areas, which I'm very pleased to see are improving as we go on, and thank you for the report. It's very, very interesting. Can I ask about the question of partner relationships? Is this indicating there that we're talking about our relationships with the Kent County Council in the first place? And are there any other partnerships that we're involved with that are included in any of these negotiations or discussions? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Daly. So where we refer to partner relationships, this is a broad category. So it includes Kent County Council. It also includes our Mid-Kent Services Partnership partners, and it includes other local public sector organisations. In the annual governance statement, we refer to our new strategic plan, which actually is really ambitious, and a lot of the things are not reliant on the council alone. So we will be required to work really well with everyone who has a stake in our place to make the things happen that we want to happen. So that's what that's referring to, is that we need to continue to build those relationships if our strategic plan is to be a success and if we're to deliver the things we want to deliver. So that's why it's been pulled up as this is something we really want to work on and have up front and centre for next year.
If there are no other questions, I'll propose the recommendation on page 14 from the Chair. Will someone second that for me? Thank you. Councillor English.
I'd love to say yes, but it's huge. I feel the council's in a strong position. We are broadly compliant. We have action plans in place for areas where we know we still need to do work. For example, we're currently working on our email retention and updating the way we retain information and making sure that practices are followed through. So we are not perfect, but we have identified the areas we need to work on, and we are working on them. And I don't think we're alone in that. We have an information management group set up that meets quarterly. They review the action plan and progress, and Councillor Harvey is the member representative on that group. And I'm happy, I can provide updates to you all if you'd like, chapter and verse about data protection. I'm more than happy to give you regular by email or other. But yeah, we're well on our way, but as ever, there are things we still could do to be better and to improve.
Oh, Councillor Round.
On that front, I'm hoping that you're going to give me a one-word answer on this one. It does follow from Councillor Daly's suggestion, but are you watching the effects of it and what's happening and where it's happening in terms of other management elsewhere?
Yes.
So just to clarify, the recommendation is to approve the annual governance statement for 2018-19 as attached as amended. So that's in the amended papers you've got in front of you. Are you all happy with that? Yep, agreed. Excellent. Agenda item 13, the Audit, Governance and Standards Committee annual report. Mr. Clark, could you please introduce?
I'll actually, if I may, Chair, hand over to Jen Warrilow, who's our audit manager at Maidstone, who compiled the report. May I hand over?
Thank you, Rich. So the report covers the activities of the Audit, Governance and Standards Committee for the previous municipal year. It highlights that the committee was well attended and has reviewed business in line with its terms of reference. If I can draw your attention to page 43 of the pack, where it focuses on member development. So there's been a session this afternoon before the meeting. It talks about the possible items for discussion during 1920. This is something that will be obviously discussed with members and delivered throughout the year. If I can hand back.
Any questions? Councillor Perry?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, it's on page... This is a real nitpicking point, but it did slightly amuse me when I saw it. You say on page 39, put my glasses back on, the committee was comprised of 10 members, 9 borough councillors and 2 parish councillors. Unless I'm quite mad, I think that's 11. Now, I know the old accountant joke about what does 2 and 2 make, and you say any answer you'd like it to be, but I think as this is our report, we ought to just make sure we've got the numbers right. I'm sorry, it's only a minor point, but I did smile when I saw it.
Thank you for pointing that out. It was obviously an amendment after I'd first drafted. Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, I'll propose the recommendations on page 33. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Perry. Are you happy if I take all 3 at once? Yes. Yeah? Okay. So, 1, that the Audit, Governance and Standards Committee annual report for 2018-19 is agreed, that the chairman of the Audit, Governance and Standards Committee provides the report to a meeting of the full council to demonstrate how the committee has discharged its duties, and 3, that the committee, subject to any comment or amendment, agrees the briefing sessions proposed in Appendix A. Are they all agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 14, the Annual Internal Audit Report and Opinion 2018-19. Mr Clark, can you please introduce?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This report sets out the conclusion to the work programme that this committee approved about 15 months ago now, March 2018, which culminates in the opinion that I'm required to give to you each year under public sector internal audit standards, offering my view as to the effectiveness of the Council's internal controls, risk management and corporate governance. As I've already given the conclusion away, my conclusion is that the Council has effective internal controls, corporate and governance, risk management for the year. This is the fifth of these reports I've presented during my time, and I've presented a positive assurance conclusion each year, which is something the Council should be proud of having received, because it's certainly not to be taken for granted and not something that all of my head of audit colleagues around the country will be able to say. But the report sets out the work that goes into underpinning that conclusion, and Chairman, I'll just run briefly through a few of the highlights. The first of which on page 51 is something I'm obliged to say out loud and have in the minutes under standards, which is that I'm satisfied that the work has been completed with sufficient independence and without undue influence and interference by members or officers through the year. Again, I'm very happy to have received the support from members and officers that we have, and that support has not strayed into interfering with the work that we deliver. Page 55 onwards goes into more detail about the individual projects and programmes that go towards the opinion. The first of which, the table at the bottom of 55, just the numeric outturn. We committed to a plan of around 530 days. We've actually over-delivered the number of days this year, going to 545. That's largely because of additional work and consultative work and investigative work we've done as detailed in the report. But it does mean that in terms of the quantity of work, I'm satisfied that we've delivered a sufficient volume to give a sound opinion. Page 56 across to 57 details some of the individual audit review projects that have gone towards that opinion. There are a couple which at the time of compiling this report were awaiting completion. They're all at an advanced stage, and I'm satisfied that there's nothing within those that would cause me to modify my opinion. Members will, as is common practice, get an interim update from us in later this year, November, December time, and we'll include the results of those projects within that report once they are available. Page 58 details the small handful of projects which were within the original plan back in March 2018 that for various reasons moved out of the plan as risks changed and priorities changed over the year. Again, I'm satisfied that the non-completion of those projects doesn't threaten the overall opinion, and in many cases it's simply a matter of rescheduling them by a few months into the new year. From page 59 onwards, we detail the executive summaries of those reports which were completed. Typically, each project sits atop a report which is 15 to 20 odd pages. What we provide here is 2-3 paragraphs by way of a summary that we hope provides enough information to give members a flavour of what we examined. But as ever, full reports are available on request for members with particular interests in specific areas. Members will note in that section that we also refer to where we've raised recommendations for improvement in each project. The Council's response to those we detail in page 67 of the pack. This sets out that over the course of the year we've dealt with a little way shy of 100 recommendations, prioritised low, medium, high and one critical rated recommendation. That the Council generally has a good record of taking action in line with what we agreed and making sure that any deficiencies that we identify are remedied. There are 16 overdue recommendations, the majority of which stem from 3 specific projects, which I describe in more detail on page 68. One of those, contract management, members will be familiar with because you've had periodic updates on that topic come to this committee. The other two, emergency planning and animal welfare control, were both in their time weak-rated reports with high priority recommendations that, for the reasons detailed here, the Council is still working towards addressing. I'm satisfied in the context of my overall opinion that there's no undue threat to the Council for their making progress on these matters. But nevertheless, given that there are high priority actions overdue at this point in time, I imagined that unless I put it in the report, members might ask me more about that anyway. So hopefully this provides you with some insight into the sorts of areas that we're addressing and the Council's revised timescales for taking those actions. Page 69 onwards goes into some of the non-project work, investigative and risk management supporting work that we do to enhance the Council's overall corporate governance arrangements. This year, as demonstrated by the excess number of days delivered, there's been a few longer investigations into matters that have arisen over the course of the year. There's nothing of that I'd particularly want to draw to members' attention, except to say that in one case there was a result leading to a police caution as a result of a matter that was referred to us. None of these matters happen to come through the whistleblowing route this year is another point of interest. On to page 70, some of the other advice work that we've delivered includes this year taking on responsibility for independent safeguarding reviews. Periodically, the Kent Safeguarding or the Kent Children's Safeguarding Board, as a result of incidents that occur within the borough, commissions from each public authority that had contact with the individuals involved, a report examining how that relationship with the individuals unfolded and asks to reflect upon whether anything could have been done differently to avert the tragic circumstances triggering the report. These can be quite detailed pieces of work. We've completed 3 of them to date, and the general conclusion of the 3 is that the Council has dealt properly with the relationships it had with those people in line with their procedures that they existed at the time. The final section of the report from page 71 is looking at the audit service. I'm very aware that a necessary component for you to be able to take on board the messages that I convey is trust and confidence that we have a professional team delivering to appropriate professional standards. I'm pleased to say this time next year you won't just have to take my word for it, because this time next year we also have received the external quality review that we're required to commission every 5 years, which is mentioned in this report. I'm hoping to commission that later in 2019 with a view to the report coming before members next spring. But on the self-assessment that we deliver in the interim period between the external quality assessments, I'm confident to say to members that we've undertaken work in line with professional standards. And in terms of, from page 75, the training and qualifications of the team, it's all very well having the processes that are in place to deliver work to standards, but those processes need to be operated by people with the skills and experience to do so. And I'm thankful and grateful for having a team who are well up to delivering that and have a real enthusiasm for developing their skills further to help grow even more into the experience of the internal audit role. I highlight particularly in this report Ben Davis, who joined us as the first applicant for our graduate training scheme, who achieved his full professional qualification earlier this year and has stayed with us after the conclusion of that training contract in now a senior auditor role. I'll also briefly mention Jen to my left, who's awaiting results still for the final stage of her professional qualification. So I very much hope next time I report to you that I can include Jen among those people who've achieved a full professional qualification. I'll just conclude briefly by again expressing my thanks to members and officers for supporting our work across the year, and I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Councillor Daly.
Well, first of all, thank you for the report, which I say this every year. I have to say it again. I'm amazed, actually, at the breadth and the width and the depth of subjects that you cover. An incredible amount of work, and thank you for it. The unfortunate thing is that there are some items which are shown as weak in the report, and how they're dealt with, I think, needs perhaps to be looked at in a different way. I don't know. Hopefully we can come to an agreement on that. Because I do believe that Ashford and Swale, if they receive weak reports, they bring it to a committee especially. The reports come in as an individual item. And I would like to suggest that possibly, Madam Chairman, we could think in terms of doing that here if we have weak reports through the annual system, that we bring those out and look at them in more detail. Because I think that if we put it onto the work programme, it is definitely then going to be looked at in detail and probably then brought to everybody's attention in more focus. So that's that. I think that I do like your optimism that we are all going to be here next year. we won't mention the B word; it'll come in later on. But the way things are going, I'm not quite sure where we shall be this time next year. But anyway, but thank you for that, Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Clark, will you able to respond, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you're right. The way that different authorities deal with weak reports is a matter for the members of each authority. Ashford and Swale do have an approach that brings the reports in full. The purpose of doing that is very much about looking at the implementation of the recommendations and watching the journey of the report, if I can be a little cliched there, in making sure that all of the actions are taking place at the proper time and allowing the committee to both support that process and gain assurance that services who find themselves in the position of having an adverse audit opinion are taking steps to address the issues that came up. I mean, if I might make a suggestion about sort of the practicalities of how that might be taken forward. It's on the work programme in January, but potentially I could bring forward in September the update to our annual audit charter, which is sort of the overarching document that covers how the audit service relates to members and relates to officers, and include within that a proposed mechanism for how that extra examination might work, and give members the opportunity to see the proposal in the context of the audit charter and take a view as to how they want to take that forward, be it as suggested or by some other means.
Councillor Daly, are you satisfied with that? Councillor Daly, does that answer your question?
Yes, I'm having difficulty hearing, I have to tell you tonight. I'm sorry. My magic ears are not necessarily working very well. So if I heard it correctly, I'm quite happy with that, and I would like perhaps to add this to the recommendation. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Perry.
Just to reassure Councillor Daly, I'm having trouble hearing as well, and I've got a hearing aid, but I'm not sure it's absolutely working. But that's not good. Councillor Daly has said what I was going to say, actually. I think I was a little nervous when I see weak in the plan, and I think what you're suggesting is probably a good way forward. So I really support that. I'd just like to add my thanks to the work you do, because we're jolly lucky, actually. We get such a comprehensive report. And it's extremely well done and very well presented. And congratulations to your staff to get the SIPFA qualification. I know how difficult that is, and that's really difficult. So well done to all of them. Just a quick question, a couple of points. Where you again, it's back to, I think it's page 58. Let me put my glasses back on, sorry. It's where you talk about audit resources. It does worry me a little bit when I see that wording, because clearly, you know, it's very important that we get these items properly done and reviewed. And I'm sure you're doing a great job, but when it does slightly concern me that. The other is on page 60, and it's more my curiosity. When you talk about virements, do you, who actually approves a virement from one budget heading to another? Is there a particular process in place? Because it's quite a, important issue, I think. So there's a couple of points there. Thank you.
If it's okay, Councillor Perry, I'll deal with the first, and if Mark deals with the second. Yes, I mean, one of the chief advantages of working in a partnership, across a four-way partnership, is that issues of resilience are easier to manage. We did have a person offer an extended sickness absence period during 1920, but that's, in the context of all four plans put together, had quite a limited effect, and to the extent that those projects are have just been moved from one year to another. The recruitment one, for instance, down there, is actually finishing now as part of the 1920 plan, so it's just been put back by a few months. So that, coupled with some of the additional investigative and reporting work that I mentioned in the presentation, has meant that we've had to reschedule some of the sort of lower risk, more routine work. But I'm happy that kind of rescheduling is an appropriate and proportionate response to the risks as they change, and I'm able to give you an opinion that's comprehensive.
On your second question, Councillor Perry, about budget violence, as it states in the report, the financial procedure rules, which are part of the Constitution, set the limits within which we can carry out violence, and it was noted in the report that we need to be better in documenting the authorisation of those, so that's actually been taken on. Members of Policy and Resources Committee may recall seeing in our quarterly reports to Policy and Resources where Policy and Resources Committee approves violence or budget transfers, it's the same thing. And so yes, there is a formal procedure for agreeing those and authorising them.
Councillor Round.
Thank you, Chair. I carry along Councillor Daly and Councillor Perry's theme and say that I've probably actually been at all five of the presentations by the Head of Audit. And as the Head of Service actually says, he's pretty happy the fact that he's presenting a report probably where many of his contemporaries across the country won't be reporting as well. As in terms of that, we've got to consider in Maidstone how lucky we are. We have a very good report. We have seen a lot of evidence of good progress being made, and where there has been a few weaknesses highlighted in terms of contract management. I've actually been to a briefing recently, and I can tell you that I'm fairly confident that a lot of improvements have been made there, and things are well on their way to becoming an exemplary service there. So on the basis of that, I think it's fair to say that, following the two previous speakers and myself, that tonight we should at least applaud that team and record a vote of thanks to the Head of Service and his team for such exemplary work.
Councillor English.
Yes, just to echo Councillor Round's point, I've seen up and down the country a fair number of audit reports actually, and to say ours are both in presentational and informational terms and in terms of the actual content, some of the better ones that you see. The issue about contract management has been flagged up, and it actually shows the robustness of the systems, both from an audit point of view and from the member committee involvement point of view, in that a significant amount of progress has been made. And I do join in thanking the audit team for all of their work. Having said that, because the risk, of course, is that because we have been so effective that a certain amount of complacency can creep into the system, and we have to be on our watch that when we look at the report in September, we are actually trying to continue and improve on what is extremely good practice already, rather than assuming that we are all perfect, because we are not, although we are very, very good compared with some of our competitors. And it's about continuous improvement, isn't it, both for officers and members on an already good situation. And I would like to support the recommendation that we do review the relevant procedures as part of the Charter review in September.
Councillor, do you want to come back?
You make a very good point about guarding against complacency. I think the external quality review every 5 years is an important check on that, precisely that risk. It's one of the reasons why, I mean, you'd expect me to have this attitude, I hope, as an auditor, but I am looking forward to being audited and to learning how I can improve further.
Councillor Kahaka, have I pronounced that right, or have I got it wrong?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to just join the Councillor Perry and Councillor English, and then would like to just endorse the positive outcome from the internal audit, and would like to convey the congratulations to those staff on their progress. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Daly offered to add to the recommendation his comments about the reports. Do you need that added, or will you just take that on board?
I'm happy to when I bring forward the Charter in September, I'll ensure that I cover off that element, and I can draw specific reference to it in the recommendations in September if that helps remind members and ensure the proper discussion is had. But I'm happy to incorporate it at that time.
Okay, in that case, if there are no other questions, we'll go to the recommendations on page 46. Are you happy if I take them all as one? Yep. So they're all to note. Do you all note? Yep, all agreed. Thank you. Moving on then to agenda item 15. Mr. Green, will you please introduce?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The committee has asked me to report at each meeting on the budget risks that we face as a council. And you'll see from this report that, as at the last meeting, the two main risks that I see for the budget are local government funding arrangements and the risk of a disorderly Brexit. First of all, on local government funding arrangements, we still don't have certainty about what the local government funding arrangements will be next year, in other words, 2021. We're told that the existing arrangements are going to roll on for a further year, but that still leaves quite a lot of room for uncertainty, for example, about the council tax referendum limit, how much in the way of business rates we'll be able to retain locally, and about specific grants. So we are working in a very uncertain environment, and the budget process that we're about to kick off will have to reflect that. So far as Brexit is concerned, I don't really need to add to all the things that have already been said. I mean, there are two levels of impact for us. First of all, the overall impact that it may or may not have on the economy, because a downturn in the economy will affect us. But there's a very specific impact if there's a disorderly Brexit, because we know from the preparations that we did back in March that we could be on the hook for some quite significant costs. If, for example, there's traffic disruption, that will involve us in extra costs with services like waste collection, and the amount of money that so far central government has offered has really been derisory. We've got 35,000, which is well short of the potential costs that we could face here in Maidstone. So those are the two main risks that I see for the council, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments that members may have.
Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chair. It was on that particular point that I would like an officer's reaction, and concerning the costs that we have been given for Brexit. You make your point perfectly well. We are right in the middle of London and Dover. We are affected by one of the most important, if not the busiest motorway in the country. Our country roads are strewn with lorries seeking parking and defecating in lay-bys. We have constant traffic problems created by diversions, certainly in my ward and my neighbouring wards. I think that whatever amount of money is being given. I think this council's job is to ensure, and I hopefully it will be a unanimous reaction, that we as an entire council lobby the government for a bit more than this petty little amount of money that we are being offered. This council is not only in Kent, we're in the middle of it, right in the middle of it. And indeed, can you confirm to me whether in fact other councils are in the same boat and they may be lobbying in the same direction? Because I believe together with the county council as well as the district, we should be putting some form of demand and lobby mechanism to 10 Downing Street on that matter.
Yes, as you can imagine, Councillor Round, it is a very hot topic, and we are working with other councils in Kent as part of the Kent Resilience Forum, and whenever the Kent Resilience Forum strategic planning group for Brexit meets, we don't hesitate to push the MHCLG representative for funding. I think things have got a bit frozen in central government, so we haven't seen any action, but maybe we'll see a bit more movement over the next few weeks.
Councillor English.
Well, on this very point, I mean, given all the statements that have been coming out of number 10 and Downing Street, and to an extent number 11 Downing Street, about effectively the end of austerity and various other things, it does seem to me, and government expenditure to deal with various consequences of various actions, that this is a time to try and join with other local authorities, whatever their political complexion, to try and argue very strongly that an action programme is needed to deal with the very unpredictable consequences of where we are. And we should not be leaving any stone unturned at this point, however unlikely it seems to be, because some very unlikely things have been happening in politics recently. So perhaps we should, we should be trying as much as possible cross-party to see what we can do for the people of Maidstone and Kent as a whole.
Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Chairman. I accept what other members have said, but personally I think that's a slightly narrow way to look at it, because there are other public sector organisations who are also going to be affected, whether you're talking about the police, Kent Fire and Rescue, etc. So I actually think it should be a completely coordinating effort. This is not just about district authorities plus KCC. I'm sure the police are making contingency arrangements as well and looking for further funds. And I think we should actually be joining up with Kent Police, Kent Fire and Rescue. And if all organisations go and kick down the door, I think you'll get a far swifter response. So for me, I think we should be widening our circle of thought processes. And I'd just like some reassurance from our Director of Finance that you'd be happy to take up that recommendation, please.
Yes, I'd be very happy to do that, Councillor Blackmore and Councillor English. As I said, we work together with other public sector bodies, not just local authorities, in the Kent Resilience Forum, and I agree completely that a collective approach is likely to be the most effective.
Councillor Daly.
Well, the whole business of this Brexit situation is becoming more obviously dangerous in financial terms, week by week, as we go down the road. And I'm not going to get into the Remainer argument or anything about that, other than the fact we are where we are. The government has now made its decision that by October the 31st, we're going to be out, full stop. That's it, whatever else happens. What concerns me is the fact that the figures which we've been looking at as our forward projection over the next 4 to 5 years has been based on an inflation rate of around about 2.5%. And everything that we're doing is based on that prediction. Now, it seems to me already that that's going to be wildly out by as much as maybe even 200%. It might be 5% or 6% or 7% even, in which case then we are really going to be in serious trouble in certain aspects of our jobs that we do, whether or not it's contracted out or not, because all of these things will be impacting upon our financial basis. So where we're at the moment is in no man's land. We have no idea. When it's happened, we will know fairly quickly, I think, what is. But this business about the money side of it, I mean, I've been astounded by the amount of money that's been bandied about in the last week. I don't know if it's come from the old Chancellor or the new Chancellor or no Chancellor at all, but when somebody can suddenly whistle up £100 million for the police, just like that, I mean, the £100 million got to come from somewhere, and I don't know where it's coming from, unless you're printing it. If you're printing it, it's 10 times worse, because there's no value behind it. So we're not going to go back to the gold standard, but I mean, we are really in a pickle now, to the point where I just don't know where it's going to go. But where we find ourselves after November, I mean, I just don't know. It may be, of course, that we're all wrong and it just all collapse in a heap of whatever, I don't know. But the thing is, this business of the forward projections that we have made based on figures which we've been led to believe are concrete or concretable, are all now already just fading away. So I would like to hear from the Director of Finance how he is going to come to the office in the mornings and work out what he's going to do next.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Daly. You're right that the projections could easily change, and the way that we deal with those in the budget planning process is to do scenario planning. So in the process that has just kicked off to set a budget for 2021, we'll look at a range of different scenarios, adverse, neutral, favourable, and clearly we've got to think about what an adverse scenario might look like, but as you say, it could mean higher inflation. So by doing that, I hope that we will be prepared for an adverse set of circumstances and have the necessary contingency plans in place. So, yeah, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but by looking at a range of possible scenarios, I hope we can at least be as prepared as we can be for if it turns out as badly as you expect or think.
I have no other questions. The recommendations are on page 97 of the amended agenda or 82 of the original. There is one recommendation to note. Is that agreed? Do you want to add one for your...
Yes, if I may, please, Chairman. I'm a little bit concerned because this probably sounds a bit clunky. So if anyone's got any fine-tuning or other words, I'd be deeply grateful. So if we can make what's there, note 1, and then I suggest as bullet point 2, in addition, the Director of Finance and Business Improvement works together with all district councils, KCC and other Kent-based public sector bodies in the lobbying of additional finance from central government for Brexit something. Mitigation effects, please.
Yes, it does.
Is that seconded? Is it seconded? Have you got that? Yeah. Okay, so there are now two recommendations. The first one is to note and has been agreed. The second one is what Councillor Blackmore just said out. Is that one agreed? Agreed. Agenda item 17, the updated capital strategy. Mr. Green, could you please introduce? Sorry, everyone, I missed the whole agenda item. Agenda item 16, the Treasury Management Annual Review. On page 97, Mr. Green, could you please introduce?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are required to report on the performance of the Treasury Management function, and the report in front of you sets out the performance for Treasury Management for 2018-19. At the end of the financial year 18-19, we had investments of approximately £15 million, and the details are set out in the report on page 105. The end of March actually is generally the lowest point in the year for our cash investments, because it's only after the end of March that council tax and business rates income starts coming in again. So now, for example, as of today, we're up to 26 million. The context for all of this is that we have a capital programme, which I'll be coming on to in the next report, which means that we will have quite significant cash requirements over the next few years. So whilst we're holding cash at the moment, we will be moving into a borrowing position over the next year. So the cash that we hold is generally held on a short-term basis, and the details of the holdings that you see in this report reflect that. We want to keep a good degree of liquidity so that as and when the cash is needed for capital investments, it's there for us. But we're not borrowing before we have to, because the cost of borrowing, although it's relatively cheap for the council, at just over 2% or so, is still more than we earn on cash balances. You'll see from the report that we earn around 1% on our cash balances. So it makes sense to hold off borrowing until we have to. So that's the general approach that we're taking with Treasury Management. The report sets out the investments that we held at the end of March, as I've said, and the report asks you to note that we've complied with the SIPFA's Code of Practice and with our own performance indicators, and that no amendments required to our procedures. So again, very happy to take any questions that you may have on the report.
Councillor English.
I mean, I'm seriously relaxed about this. This is another good report, quite informative. Just a little baffled. I mean, I'm sure there's a very good explanation for it, and they're a fine bank, but why such a small amount of £377 invested with Svenska Handelsbanken? I mean, it seems very pointless. or I mean, there must be an explanation for it, and I'm sure there is, but it does seem a bit odd.
This is just a small amount to keep the account open. Typically, when we're investing, it's for amounts of £1 million, £2 million, and it just so happened that as of 31st of March, we didn't have any big investments with Svenska Handelsbanken, but we may well have in the future.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 100, Mr. Green, we've got two service loans, one to Kent Savers, one to One Maidstone. One attracts an interest rate of 1%, the other is interest-free. I'm sorry, I don't know what a service loan is, so I'd be grateful if you could just clarify that for me. The other thing is, you've got a loan to Coventry Trust at 3%, and that's a charity. And I'm just a little bit concerned that we're treating different entities in different ways. How come the first two have such low rates, and indeed one has a nil rate, and the trust has an interest rate of 3%?
The loans are there for different reasons. The first two, they're described as service loans, and they support service objectives of the council. So with Kent Savers, it's to help Kent Savers, which is basically a credit union, to provide financing facilities for people who might not otherwise be able to access finance. And similarly with the bid, we've supported the bid in establishing it, and so this is just another way that we've helped the bid get up and running. On the other hand, with Cobtree, we've treated this as a purely commercial transaction, hence the commercial rate of interest on the loan.
Councillor English.
I think Mark's mostly explained it, but because of the timing with the business improvement ballot, that essentially we're setting up a new organisation and there wasn't the finance available internally within the existing organisation to completely run the entire ballot process. So as it was a corporate objective of NBC as well as the new organisation, it was effectively underwriting the process of the actual ballot itself, because obviously there was no money in the new organisation until the ballot was won.
Right, if there are no further questions, we'll move to the recommendations on page 97. There are 2 recommendations. The first is to be noted that the review of the financial year 2018-19 in accordance with SIPT's Code of Practice on Treasury Management, along with the prudential and treasury indicators, be noted. And the second, that no amendments to the current treasury management procedures are necessary as a result of the review of activities in 2018-19. Are these both agreed? Agreed. Agenda item 17 on page 107. The updated capital strategy. Mr. Green, could you please introduce?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first of all, I should apologise to members of Policy and Resources Committee who will have heard some of this already, because a similar report was considered by them last week, but it is appropriate for this to go both to Policy and Resources and to this committee. Now, the capital strategy is a new requirement of the SIPFA Prudential Code. Of course, the Council has always had a capital strategy, although it may not have been expressed in precisely this way, because we've had a capital programme and we've had a strategy for doing capital investments. But SIPFA introduced this new requirement, and it is actually very helpful to be able to bring together all of the things that make up the Council's capital strategy in the way that we've done here. And the specific prompt for doing it in this way is that although we had a capital strategy which this committee considered back in January, that was the first time a capital strategy had been done, and since then best practice in this field has developed. We have new financial advisors, Link Asset Services, so we're taking the opportunity to improve the capital strategy, and the document that you've got here reflects what the Council is doing. It doesn't actually contain anything new in terms of what the Council is proposing in the way of capital investments. It was all in the capital programme that was agreed by Council back in February, subject to an additional investment that Policy and Resources Committee agreed in March. But as I say, it brings it all together in one place. And probably the best way of getting an overview of this is in the summary of the capital programme, which is on page 118. And this shows what the Council's planning to invest in over the next 5 years. You can see that the 2 main strands in the capital programme are housing development and regeneration, where we're proposing to invest 35 million. And the second main strand is in the acquisition of commercial assets, which is another 35 million. And acquisition of commercial assets isn't just for commercial reasons. The Council's had a policy, always has had a policy of investing in the borough. So these investments serve a twofold purpose. They generate a commercial return, but they also support the local economy here in Maidstone. And we also set out in the capital strategy how we benchmark our capital investments and make sure that our investments and the borrowing to support them isn't excessive. So you can see in the report how our financing costs compare with our net revenues. And even at the end of the period, the financing costs only account for 7% of our revenues, which if we were a commercial business would be seen as a pretty modest level of borrowing. And one of the challenges that I've put to members, at Policy and Resources Committee is whether members actually would like us to be more ambitious in our capital investment. And that's something that needs to be considered, I suggest, as we go into the budget process for next year. So the recommendation here is that you agree the capital strategy incorporating the capital programme, and if you're content with it, it will go along with Policy and Resources Committee's recommendation to Council in September for agreement. Again, happy to take any questions.
Councillor English.
I'm pretty happy with it, and I think, you know, I personally think that our risk profile needs to change. But an immediate question, a lot of members and officers will have to grapple with this subject. It is a relatively complex subject. It's not necessarily obvious how to compose a capital strategy, how to interrogate it, etc., etc. So the question is there a training need for members of P&R and Audit? And I probably should have raised this earlier when we were looking at the workshop programme for this committee, to actually enable members to get more to grips with some of these issues.
Yes, this was actually raised at Policy and Resources Committee as well. And what I'd suggest, if members are in agreement with this, is that we have a briefing session like the one we had earlier this evening before our January meeting, because that's the meeting at which the updated capital strategy will be considered. So that would be good timing, I'd suggest, for a briefing. So it'll be the material hopefully will be fresh in members' minds when they come to consider the issues. So that would be my suggestion, Councillor English, if you and other members are content with that.
Right. If there are no other questions, we turn to the recommendation on page 107. There's one recommendation: the capital strategy set out at Appendix A be recommended to Council. Is that agreed? Agreed. Turning to page 132, the External Audit Fee Letter 2019-20. Mr Green, could you please introduce?
Thank you. This is the final one from me, and a very short report. We're going to be talking in a minute about the audit for 18-19, but this report asks you to note the quote that we've had from Grant Thornton for next year, or the next year's audit for 19-20, and the fee that's proposed is 38,866, which is the same as this year, and I'm happy to recommend that. But if members have any specific questions, then Tina James is here from Grant Thornton, and would also, I'm sure, be happy to help with any questions members have.
Councillor Blackmore.
Just one simple question. Approximately how many hours are involved in our external audit? I know that sounds a slightly bonkers thing, but I'm always fascinated as to how many. Obviously, you've got 3 names here, so we know there'll be 3 individuals who at some point will have some input from Grant Thornton, but I'd just be interested to know how many hours approximately we're talking about.
I can't really say how many hours exactly. I'd have to go away and run a report to get to that point. I would say we split it into 3 stages. So we look at our planning stage, our interim work, and then our final work. Planning is probably a couple of weeks' work. The 3 people that you see named in the letter, plus an associate with the team. Interim, probably the same again, 2 weeks. And then final is 3 to 4 weeks, depending on the complexity of the issues that come up and different things like that.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, as the audit fee increase, have we got the fund available to cover that? That's right. That the
Sorry. The audit fees, the same as last year, it's set centrally by the PSAA. As regards your funds for covering that, that's not something I would be able to answer.
Are there any other questions? No? Okay, so the recommendations are on page 132, that the fee of $38,866 for the 1920 financial statements, audit and value for the money conclusion be noted. Are members agreed? Noted. Turning to agenda item 19 on page 139. Mr. Hartgrave, I believe you're introducing this one.
Thank you. Members will recall that the draft statement of accounts for 2018-19 prepared by the 31st of May were informally presented by Mr. Green to members of this committee at a briefing held here at the Town Hall on the 10th of June. Being draft accounts, of course, meant that they were subject to external audit, including a statutory deadline of the 31st of July for finalising the accounts. I'm pleased to report that the audit process is nearing its conclusion and the final statement of accounts, including the supporting narrative report for 2018-19, of course incorporating the necessary audit adjustments, is presented on pages 282 to 378 of the amended agenda. I will now hand over to Tina James again from Grant Thornton, who will take you through the audit findings report, which is also included on the amended agenda on pages 253 to 281. We are, of course, happy to collectively take any remaining questions that you might have on the statement of accounts following Tina's presentation.
So our audit findings report brings together the significant risks and issues that we would have included in our audit planning report and seeks to give you our current position on those, as well as an update on where we are with our audit work in advance of hopefully signing the accounts. So if I just direct your attention first of all to page 255 in the amended pack, page 3 of the report. It's just the headlines section just to give you an overview. So we received the statements at the end of May. There's a slight revision in them to June, which is explained there, which just related to some additional information about related retained business rates. Our work to date has identified an adjustment relating from the PPE evaluations, which we talk about later in the report, and I can refer to there. There is a list there of some work that's still outstanding, which we are working on as a team today and tomorrow to hopefully reach a conclusion. I would say that that work is ongoing and we're not at the point yet where we can finalise. However, the present status, we would anticipate giving an unmodified or unqualified audit opinion. If I just draw your attention then, if we go to the next page, the page number 6 in the report, which is number 258 in your pack, where we start to talk about the significant findings against the audit risks. So in the audit planning report that we presented to you, there were 4 risks mentioned. 2 of those are standard, so the revenue cycle and the management overrider controls. The revenue cycle we rebutted, there's been no change to that assessment from our work. And management overrider controls, we've substantially completed our work in this area and we are able to report we've not identified any issues. On the following page, there are 2 further risks, one of which was the evaluation of land and buildings, and the fourth and final one was related to the pension liability. These are standard risks for public sector and we would expect to see them anywhere, not specific to Maidstone. With regards to the evaluation of land and buildings, our work is ongoing in this area, although to date we haven't identified any issues other than the adjustment of 905,000, which is mentioned there, which just related to the treatment of depreciation on revalued assets. We hope to conclude this work over the next today, but it is ongoing at the moment. There's nothing that we've seen so far that would lead us to believe that any material issues are evident in this area. On the next page, we talk about the pension fund net liability risk. We have concluded our work in this area, and we're happy to say that we've not identified any issues in respect to the liability. One thing to note here, which we talk about later on in the report as well, is the MacLeod judgment, which you may be aware of, the court case at the end of last year. The response to this within the council was to go back to the actuary to get an impact assessment, which determined that there wasn't a material impact from the MacLeod judgment. We've reviewed that, we've reviewed the assessment behind it, and we're happy to agree, and therefore the disclosure in the accounts we believe is appropriate and sufficient. On the next page, we just talk about some of the key estimates and judgments that are in the accounts, revenue recognition and the provision for the business rates, which is 1.8 million. The work we've done to date on these lead us to believe that the estimates are reasonable and management judgments are reasonable, and therefore we've got nothing to report on those two areas. The next page is just the same for land and buildings. Although our work is ongoing in land and buildings, we have done significant work on the estimate, and at present we're happy to say that the process employed by management is appropriate, and hopefully we'll be able to conclude that the valuation itself is appropriate. But that, like I say, there are still some things that were ongoing in that area. I think the next thing perhaps to draw your attention to is just the adjustment that we found. So just on page, sorry, I'm just flicking through. It's page 22 in the report, which I believe is 274 in the pack. So it's quite a technical adjustment, but it was just related to the depreciation and the treatment of that on a revalued asset, and it just had to be reversed out. So an adjustment that's been made in the accounts, and we're happy with the way that's now being treated. The second adjustment mentioned there was just a reclassification between something being held as an asset to be moved as another asset as a debtor. So again, just a reclassification, and we're happy with the way that's now being treated in the accounts. The next page following that, page 23, we've just referred to some audit adjustments around disclosures, which were just from discussions and our review of the accounts and discussions with management. We're now happy that those have been amended in the accounts, so we've no issues going forward with those. I think that's everything I wanted to bring to your attention, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry, I don't know when this amended agenda was issued. It's the first time I've seen it tonight, so forgive me if I didn't quite follow all the bits and pieces. I didn't quite understand what you were alluding to, read the MacLeod judgment, but because it's, no, I don't know it's to do with pension liability, thank you, Councillor English, but I didn't quite understand the significance. I know there's a mention that we could put more into the pension fund. I don't quite understand how significant that is. And the other thing related to, you've mentioned about Brexit being the 29th of March. Now, obviously, that's all been changed, but that hasn't been updated. So I don't know if there's anything else that you've noticed in the meantime that we should be doing in connection with Brexit, putting more money aside, etc. As I say, I've only just had a quick look at it tonight, so forgive me for not digesting it properly.
So on the MacLeod judgment, so the ruling back in December last year about the transitional protection in firefighters' pensions specifically has been considered with potential impact on the local government pension scheme, and if there's the transitional protections that were restricted should be extended further on the impact that might have on the liability. There were transitional protections when they changed, I'm trying to think of the right wording, they changed the basis of the scheme and they protected people who were in the scheme at a certain point in time and not others. I think that's probably reasonable, yeah. So it was whether or not the fact that that had been challenged and the government had lost would then have an impact on other public sector liabilities for pensions. And we asked all public sector that we audit, all the councils that we audit, to just get an assessment from the actuary as to what the impact on them is likely to be based on their membership and the profile of their membership. The finance team here went out and got that impact assessment, and although there would be an impact, it wouldn't be material based on the information they had at that point in time. That's that.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, that is starting now to make sense, because I think it was the same with the police when they moved from a 30th scheme to 40th, and what impact that would have, I think, on those who were already there. And so am I correct in assuming there's a phased transition? Is that what you mean? It's phased depending on your age and your length of service? Okay, right, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Councillor English?
Like everyone else, I only saw the adjusted reports. So, there's a court case going on in relation to rates valuations for NHS properties, which will presumably include Maidstone Hospital. And I'm not sure whether the impact of a reduction in the rateable value would have a significant impact on our funds or not. So I just wonder whether it's something we should be considering as a risk within this report.
I am aware of the potential for hospitals to claim back rates, but at the moment it's considered to be a low enough risk not for us to have to make any provision for it in the accounts.
Fair enough.
Councillor Daly?
Well, Chairman, I was only going to say that, like everything else associated with these papers, which are many and various, I'm just astounded by the amount of tremendously interesting information that there is contained in here. How you keep track of it, I don't know, but I want to congratulate all those who have been involved in putting it together. We scratch around looking for typos, and really, quite frankly, I can't find a typo. But you've taken on board all the various changes that were needed to be done in the briefing, which I think, thank you for. There's only one question that I've got. I don't know, anybody can answer this one, really. That's the question concerning the regeneration of the town centre as it applies to the Maidstone East redevelopment. Now, if there's anybody that can tell me that the Queen Vic, or whatever it was called, is actually going to disappear one day, please tell me it's going to happen soon. And secondly, can anybody tell me when the Maidstone East redevelopment is likely to actually have trains running through it that we would like to see? I mean, anybody got any information on that? I'd be delighted. But no, seriously though, it is money which we've got invested, and we are looking for a return on that in due course. So is that on course? Is that really what I really want to know, please? Thank you.
Thank you. I've been advised that that's not really a question for this committee, but we can refer those questions to the Earl Committee, where they can be answered there. Yeah? Okay. Thank you. Right, if there are no other questions, they recommend... Oh, sorry, Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I agree with Councillor Daly. There's a huge amount of information here, and there's a lot. I just had one... I was just browsing through it, and I was looking actually at the balance sheet, which is on my paper on page 166, and I was just interested that the ratio between current assets and current liabilities for at the 31st of March 2018 was about 1.6, and I used to, when I was studying, I used to work on a 2-to-1 basis, but and it changes with organisations, I know. But when you look at the 31st of March 2019, the ratio between current assets and current liabilities is now 1.1. So there's been quite a little bit of a movement there in that basic ratio. Now, I'm not sure you may be able to answer this at this point in time, but I am curious to know why that has happened, because it seems to me it's quite an important ratio when you're looking at balance sheets. Thank you.
There is one rather unusual item in this year's accounts, which accounts for not necessarily all of the change in the ratio, but something which has pushed up the figure for short-term creditors here, which you can see has gone up from 14 million to 23 million. And this is because we're the administering authority for the Kent Business Rates Pool and Pilot. So at the moment, or as at 31st of March, we were sitting on quite a bit of cash, which then had to be distributed to other Kent authorities. So without doing a detailed analysis, I suggest that that's probably one of the factors that's given rise to a higher liabilities figure. But I'm happy to do some more detailed analysis to explain it, because it's a good ratio to look at, I agree, to look at the liquidity of the authority.
I'm happy to take it offline, and I mean, unless everybody else is particularly interested in it. But yeah, thank you very much, Mark. I would appreciate it. It is an important ratio, I think, in the balance sheet analysis. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? No? The recommendations are on page 139. We're going to have to amend recommendation 2. The proposed wording is that the audited statement of accounts attached to Appendix 2 is approved, subject to the issue of an unmodified audit opinion by Grant Thornton. Are members happy with that amended wording? Yeah.
I'm sorry, Chairman, I don't want you mean. What do you mean by unmodified?
The reason why a qualification to the recommendation has been put forward is that as it stands in the papers, it says the audited statement of accounts is approved. Now, as Grant Thornton have explained, they haven't quite finished their audit, although they're hoping to sign off tomorrow. So the purpose of the qualification is simply to ask members to agree the accounts, subject to Grant Thornton finally signing off on them tomorrow. And I don't know whether you want to say how confident you are about being able to sign off, but if members are content with that qualification, then you'll be able to approve the accounts and the committee will have fulfilled its responsibility.
I think we're comfortable, certainly from the work that we've done so far and what we're seeing with the work that we're still working through, that it would be an unqualified or unmodified report. As to completing the work tomorrow, we're very much focused on doing that, and we are working towards that with the finance team as well. I wouldn't like to say it's 100% certain, but we are certainly working towards that as our deadline.
Can I just ask a quick question? Why is it unmodified and not draft? Is there a reason behind the difference in the language?
So it would be our final report, but it's not qualified in any way. We haven't found any issues that we need to report, and therefore it's unmodified or unqualified and a clean report. But it is the final report. So yeah, it's just the auditor's language, I suppose. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got amended recommendation 2. Are you happy to take them all together, all 3 recommendations? Yep. Are all 3 recommendations agreed? Agreed. Thank you. In that case, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.